As it was said, my name is Nati Sharony. I was born here in this country in 1934, a long time ago. And I've served in the Israeli Defense Forces for 30 years. Most of my years I served in the artillery corps. But then as a general officer, being diverted to all kinds of positions that are not necessarily artillery, purely artillery. I acted for quite a long time as the president of the Council of Peace and Security. It's a very unique organization that doesn't exist in any other country. If you look at the organization in the United States, where you have admirals and generals joining together in a group called GINSA, well, GINSA is basically a lobby of retired officers, high-ranking officers, for the armed forces in the DoD. Lobbying for budgets, lobbying for changes, not to close a base over here and open a base over there, etc., etc., etc. We aren't a lobby at all. We were established many years ago. When I said many years ago, it's like 29 years ago. We were established as a result that the government didn't have an organization of analyzing its situation other than the armed forces. So every plan that was presented to the government was orchestrated by the armed forces. And the armed forces have a bias because they have a mission to perform, and their opinion about what to do and what not to do, what territory can be given up and what not, has to do with the idea, how do I defend the state of Israel? And that's a bias to begin with. I don't want to give up an inch. Why? Because it will make it more difficult for me to perform my major duty, which is to defend the state of Israel. So national security is something that does exist in other governments, like in the United States. And as a result that we didn't have it, a few of our retired generals decided to take the experience of so many reserve officers who have served in the armed forces for so many years and had an experience with governmental agencies of various kinds and interacting with the government ministers to form a group that will present other options than purely the military option that is presented to the government. The point is that being a non-governmental organization, the government has to want to listen to you, because if they don't want to listen to you, you can present as many papers as you want. Going to be put on the shelf and covered with dust. And אתה עושה איזה נס שזה יקרה. Okay. So that's how the organization, who had at its peak over 1,000 members, some of them passed away to a better world, some of them are joining bottom up, and today what we are trying to do is basically to educate the youngsters, not so much to present our opinion to the decision makers, because the existing government, the one before and the one before, didn't want to listen. And if they don't want to listen, you can bring the horse to the water, but you cannot make him drink. So we decided to talk to the youth of this country, even before they reach the age that give them the right to vote. We will talk to them because there is, to a large extent, ignorance about how things started and where they're heading. And they have to have at least another option on their hands to wait to see what's best according to their judgment. We are just presenting the case, and they'll have to make a decision. So we talk to the youngsters, and that's the main effort today. I would like to start with two issues, which are on, everybody likes to say it's on the table, the options are on the table. Well, I don't know whether the options are on the table, but the two things I'm talking about are on the table today. One of them, ISIS. Does ISIS present Israel with an existential threat? That's the major question. Does it present a threat? Definitely yes. But is it an existential threat? The answer is no. Where do I take those conclusions from? ISIS is not an organized army per se. They have succeeded to do what they did by threatening the opponent, by creating such a fear that the opponent, whether it's an organized army or militias or any kind of resistance, runs away. And you have seen it with the Iraqi army in Iraq. You have seen it with the Syrian army, let alone that the Syrian army now dismantled, but even the groups that do fight against Assad are afraid of ISIS. Now, I'm not going to go into those fragmentation of the Arab Spring, so-called, but it doesn't work on us. Because in order to defeat ISIS, you have to have motivation on the ground of those who are fighting ISIS. The ones who want to defend their homes, their families, and their country. If you have those three elements, and we have it in the Israeli Defense Forces, ISIS stands no chance. Can they cause damage? Yes. But not to the extent that it will bring Israel to its knees. This they don't have. And on the contrary, we do have the will and the power to push them away. So ISIS for us is not an existential problem. It may become one for Jordan, who is composed of a population that many of them are Palestinians, fewer are Bedouins who are loyal to the king, and we are trying to help Jordan as much as we can. And we will help Jordan when time comes, because Jordan is our strategic depth. Israel is a narrow strip. You have seen it through your trip. And the only way we can create strategic depth is by having the peace treaties with Jordan and Egypt. So the Sinai became our backyard and our den. And so is the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. We are helping today the Egyptians to fight the fragments of resistance in the Sinai. And we are helping the Jordanians in many ways and forms to close their borders in order for ISIS not to penetrate into Jordan. So this is something that I want to take off the table now. There is an ISIS, everybody talks about it, everybody wants to fight it, very few know how. The Iraqi army was defeated by them, whereas the Kurds were not defeated by them. Why? Because the Kurds want to defend their piece of land and they want to defend their homes and families. And with this motivation, they succeeded to push ISIS away. The other item, which is on the table today, heavily discussed in Congress and everywhere in the world, I mean the Middle East and Europe, the treaty between the major powers in Iran. My prime minister is obsessed with Iran. When I say obsessed, I mean in the psychological meaning of the word. Iran is the threat, Iran is the threat, Iran is the threat. And he keeps doing it. Maybe he starts to believe that it's true. But even if Iran will have a nuclear weapon, the first target is not going to be Tel Aviv. No matter what they say in the open, they want to destroy the state of Israel, to see the end of the state of Israel. They can say whatever they want. But the Iranian regime is not suicidal. Because Israel is not the poor pigeon standing on the roof and waiting for help. We have the capability to play this game. And as a result of that, the Iranian regime has to be really suicidal if they think that we are a target for any nuclear weapon. Whether in the more sophisticated way of engineering it, or whether it's a dirty bomb of a certain nature. So I think that the agreement is good. It's good for America, it's good for us. That's what I think. Now, that doesn't make it right. It just gives you another opinion. And I'll tell you why. Because when you start to attack a solution of any nature, you have to come up with options. If not this one, what should we do? Okay? There are three options. One of them, to impose more sanctions, to bring Iran to its knees, to surrender to the point where they will dismantle all their nuclear operation. That's a dream. It will never happen. It didn't happen until today. And it's not going to happen in the future. Let alone the fact that Russia and China want to be driving on the same road of imposing more strict sanctions on Iran. So it's a theoretical option. But when you start to analyze it, it won't work. The other option is a military option. Strike the nuclear facilities with a strong air force, with the right weapons, and cause as much damage as you can. Experts that analyzed this option said that it may postpone the program for a year and a half, 2 years the most. What's going to happen 2 years later? You won't have the same option to try it again. For many good reasons. The Iranians will be better prepared. You will not have the political atmosphere worldwide to do it again. And basically it won't work. Well, here you have an agreement. Whether the Iranians are going to fulfill it or not remains to be seen. But postponing the program for, let's say, 10 years, not 15, 10 years, and pushing back the program by drawing out materials to be able to create a weapon within a year, not within 3 months, as it is today. Now, everybody in Congress that sits and barks at Secretary of State has to realize that he himself never negotiated with Iranians. And if there is anybody that beats the South Koreans in negotiations, it's the Iranians. So if that's the case, then I give him the credit. That he succeeded to reach the points that were summarized in the agreement that was presented to Congress and to the American people and to everybody else today. So I gave you my opinion about the second issue. Now we took it off the table, and let's go now and talk about Israel. the conflict between Jews and Arabs in Palestine started towards the end of the 19th century. Basically, the last quarter of the 19th century was the time when land was purchased by Jews, not only in Palestine, but even on the Golan Heights and in some areas in Transjordan, with the intention to bring Jews and create a Jewish home here. Because at that time, we were 40,000 Jews in Palestine. And the 40,000 Jews lived mainly in the cities and lived off charity that was collected abroad. And a new movement came up to say, let's work the land. Let's get out of the walls of the cities and start working the land and create a connection between the people and the land, which is perceived as the promised land. And that's when small, I'll call them colonies because that's the way we used to call it. When the Rothschilds came here and helped to create a few colonies in Israel, Zichron Yaakov in the north, Petach Tikva in the center. I'm just giving you an example. People got out of the walls of the old city of Jerusalem and went to clear the marshes along the seashore in order to create a piece of land that you can cultivate and live there. The same went up north in Hedera, places where people suffered from malaria, and by the way, that's the reason that the Arabs weren't there. They went up the hills where the malaria didn't exist. So you can see that the mountains of Judea and Samaria are full with Arab villages and cities, whereas the seashore was kind of a relatively empty space. So that's the end of the 19th century. And you have to realize that the land was owned by landlords. The landlords used to live in Beirut, in Damascus, some of them in Cairo, and owned the land here. And the Arabs worked here and paid their dues to the landlord and to the government. The government was the Ottoman Turkish government. Now, once we buy the land, those peasants were deprived of their piece of land that they worked, of which they made their living, and they started to create noise. As a result of that, the Zionistic leadership went to King Faisal in Saudi Arabia and asked him to intervene, to lower the noise, to make the Arabs understand that it's going to be prosperous for all, etc., etc. It didn't work. So it became a conflict over land. It's only in the late 30s of the 20th century that another element was introduced into the conflict, the religious element. The threat that we are going to take over the third holiest place for the Muslim religion, which is Temple Mount. And this was introduced as an element by the Mufti of Jerusalem, Haj Amin al-Husseini. The whole story started because of fight of two Palestinian families, the Nashashiris and the Husseinis, over who is going to be the mayor of Jerusalem. And he succeeded as a religious leader to introduce this element into the conflict. Until then, it was a conflict over land. Now, the religious element goes up and down according to the leaders who lead the Palestinian camp and ours. To the point were in the mid-30s, happened what is called in history the Arab Rebel. At that time, we're talking about the British Mandate. Because 1917, end of World War I, the British took over. The British and the French divided the Middle East into countries according to a colonial approach, irrespective of the tribes and irrespective of tradition and irrespective of anything else. And if you look at the map, the lines are drawn with a slide rule. I mean, no border anywhere is being drawn with a slide rule. So, when this happens, the Sykes-Picot agreement between the British and the French, the Arabs started a rebel, and the rebel had another element. They wanted the British to stop Jewish immigration. They didn't want Jews to come to Palestine because Jews are buying land and taking away land from them, etc., etc., etc. But we have to bear in mind that 3 years after World War I was finished, the Balfour Declaration came up, saying that the British, the Queen of England, or the King, sorry, of England at that time, sees, or the government sees with a favorable eye, establishing a Jewish home in the land of Palestine. And the British, by the way, went along this declaration all along, to the point where they never gave the Palestinians the right of self-determination. And by the way, the Arabs didn't get from the British self-determination, and as a result of that, they could even work towards establishing a nation by the rules of the British Mandate. The rebel brought to the point of quite a few casualties on the Israeli side, on the Palestinian side, and on the British side. And the government of the UK decided to send a committee. By the way, at that time, committees weren't established in order to wipe out an issue. Today, you want to wipe out an issue. You establish a committee. The committee sits for 3 years, comes up with the conclusions. Nobody remembers what the conclusions were for, and the whole thing vanishes. Well, at that time, when they established the committee, they meant business. So they sent the committee headed by Lord Peel. Lord Peel came here and analyzed what's going on. And he came to the conclusion that the Jews and the Arabs cannot live together. They cannot live together. There are two nations that will never live in harmony. And as a result of that, you have to split this piece of land, give part to the Jews and part to the Arabs, and that's the end of the story. We were at that time 400,000 Jews in Palestine. The Arabs were twice as many, almost 900,000. And the Peel Committee recommended to give 17% of the land to us, even though we were 30% of the people, and give the rest to the Palestinians. And the reason for that is that the British came from a tradition of democracy. And the tradition of democracy says that there has to be a homogeneous community in order to preserve democracy, and in order to create a community life of a certain nature without conflicts. Now, we were spread along the seashore and in the Upper Galilee, and as a result of that, we got only 17%, because this is the place where Jews were concentrated at that time. We didn't take it. The Arabs rejected it, and nothing came out of it. But remember the conclusion. The Jews and Arabs cannot live together in harmony. That doesn't mean that I cannot live together with a neighbor of mine who is an Arab, person to person. But Arab community to a Jewish community, this cannot work. That's his conclusion. When the British decided to live the mandate and get out of Palestine, 1946, a government decision, the UN sent another committee to see how to take over from the British mandate and how to continue to operate this piece of land that is full of conflicts. And a committee of the UN came down in 1947. They analyzed the situation. We were at that time 600,000 Jews, and the Arabs were about 1.25 million. Again, we are a third of the population. And we got 51% of the land according to their recommendation. And the reason is that the southern part of the country, which we call the Negev, have you been to the Negev? No. Of course, it's a desert, why go? Anyway, the desert, according to their perception, is something that the Jews can develop to the point where it will flourish. That was the assumption. Because for many years it was empty. There was a few Bedouins roving in the Negev with their sheep, and there was no water. The water was on the other side in Transjordan, the sweet water. And they said, let the Jews work out, because they have seen a few kibbutzim in the southern part of the country, which was part of this desert, that flourished. And they said, if can they do that in the middle of the desert, let them take the desert. That's how we got 51% of the land. We accepted it, the Arabs rejected it. And the War of Independence started. Started in 47, ended in 48. I don't want to go into the War of Independence and the stories who started, who didn't start. That's a game for kindergartens. You started first, you throw the stone first. I mean, it doesn't make any difference. You have to look forward rather than try to analyze things that happened before and not being exposed to all the motivation that did exist at that time. So, when the war ended against 5 Arab countries, excluding the Palestinians, starting with Lebanon and Syria and Iraq and Jordan and Egypt, when the war ended, the borders of Israel were governing 78% of the country. And the Arabs were left with 22. You have to realize we are talking about a country the size of 28,000 square kilometers, smaller than New Jersey. And the Arabs got about 6,000 square kilometers, and we got the rest. And that's how the borders were established and signed as an agreement, not as a treaty, but as an agreement of armistice between ourselves and the Arab countries. And the Arabs were left with that little, okay? By the way, that's the 67 borders. To make it better understood, because we use always the 67 borders. Well, the borders of 1949, as were established in the Isle of Rose by an agreement, are equal by 99% to the borders of 1967, from where we started the Six-Day War. Well, you can understand. And by the way, in Israel, now we are not talking Palestine, we are talking Israel, in the areas within the borders that were established, we had about 100,000 Arabs That's all. Because many of them were driven out. Many of them ran away. So if you take the two numbers of who and put them together, those who ran away and those who were pushed out, you reach the point where only 100,000 Arabs were left in what we call the State of Israel. And you look at the green line, this is Israel, and the Declaration of Independence referred to this part of the land. Now comes the question, where are we heading? That's the major question. What has been, has been. What was done, was done. And the question is, where are we heading? What can be done in order to resolve an ongoing conflict? There is one prerequisite: the wish of the leaders on both sides. If there will be a wish on the part of the leadership on the Arab side, but a genuine one, and there will be a wish on the part of the Israeli leadership, a genuine one, not a blah blah one, but a real one, it can be resolved. For almost 20 years we are negotiating. We almost were there and it blew up. We blame the Arab leadership for blowing it up. They blame us for blowing it up. I mean, again, the kindergarten play starts again. You have to be determined. You have to understand that it has to be resolved if you want to create the conditions of this country to continue to exist. That's all. Because the effects of conquering another nation, by the way, it was never a nation. We created it to be a nation. The Arabs who were here in Palestine were not a nation. They were Arabs from all over who came here for different reasons. And when the British came in towards World War II, there was a lot of work to be done here and in Egypt at that time. And many Arabs came over here. This wasn't a nation, but it became a nation because when you take a group of people and you suppress them under occupation, they create a national feeling. And we have succeeded beautifully to create a Palestinian nation. So I treat them as a nation, I have to rely to them as a nation, and I have to think in terms of, if I want to solve the problem, it's two nations. But bear in mind, two committees came to the conclusion that the two nations cannot live together in harmony. So we have to divide the country. So first of all, you know what? We have to deal with 4 issues. The first of which is borders. What are the borders? An agreed border. Let me take a little water. Things have changed since the end of the War of Independence, because many settlements were set up on the West Bank and created, basically, by their sitting there, a different demographic situation. So we cannot go back to the borders of 1967 or 49 for that purpose. We have to think in terms of swapping land. If I want a piece of land where settlements are sitting there today, you are in Efrat, but Gush Etzion, have you been to Gush Etzion?
Yes.
Yes. Gush Etzion is meant to be part of Israel. Under any solution, we have to compensate the Palestinians, an acre for an acre, for the land that those settlements took away from the West Bank. Can we do it? We can, under the condition that the exchange or swapping of land won't exceed 4.5% of the West Bank. If they are 6,000 square kilometers, we cannot give them more than 4 to 4.5% unless we evacuate our settlements in Israel to give them land. But we can give them 4 to 4.5%. They want to swap only 1.5%, which means if we stay with a swap of 1.5%, it means that 75% of the settlers are going to stay where they are, and 25 are going to be pulled out. And 25 is about 150,000 people, which is a big number in terms of this country. By the way, I think in terms of any country, but it's a big number. When we talk 4%, 85% of the settlers can stay where they are. And then about 90,000 to 95,000 settlers will be evacuated. Also a big number, which creates a problem. But we are talking about 25,000 households. We are not talking about something which is out of space. Unfortunately, my Prime Minister talks in terms, he paraphrases peace and swap of lands and two countries to two nations, but he does everything in order to prevent it. So there is no will, on the part of my government at least, to reach a solution under their term, when they are in power. On the Arab side, we blame the Arabs for many things, but one thing I can tell you, the existing leader, you can quantify him as very good, average, any way you want. He wants peace. By the way, and he proved it by more than one example. And if you see that in Israel, buses aren't blowing up, and Arabs on the West Bank, Palestinians, are being arrested with the help of the Palestinian police, and in cases that we cannot arrive to where you have to go in order to pick them up, they do it. It shows that he chose another way than terror. And if you don't leave him any opening, he'll go to the United Nations, to the International Court in Hague. He'll go anywhere. But he doesn't want to use force. And we have to respect it and to do everything in order to negotiate with him. My Prime Minister, for reasons, by the way, my education in college was military history, so I am not going to analyze any psychological analysis of anybody. So, this is number one. Remember, 1.5%, 4%, in between there is probably 25,000 other numbers, percentage-wise, and we can reach an agreement on that, provided that we want to reach an agreement. The second issue is Jerusalem. And you've been to Jerusalem. And you plowed it, I understand, up and down. Jerusalem under King Hussein was about 6 square kilometers. That was the old city under the Jordanians and the eastern city under the Jordanians, and the ridge of Augusta Victoria, which you will probably either saw it or went there. And that was about 6 square kilometers. After the 6-Day War, an Israeli committee decided to expand the municipal border of Jerusalem and made it 70 square kilometers, more than 10 times larger, which includes about 200,000 Arabs in this expansion. And by the way, today includes about 220,000 Jews who are living in this piece of land. The extreme right in Israel says we can never give up an inch in Jerusalem. But when they say Jerusalem, I don't know whether they mean the 70 kilometers, square kilometers, or the old city, or only the holy place. I mean, it's a whole mess. And they want to keep it as a mess. The extreme left says we can give up. And in the middle, you have to sit down and come to conclusions and solve the issue. And Clinton came up with a solution. And he said, let's divide the territory of 70 kilometers in a way that the 200 Palestinians who live in that many, 28 villages and neighborhoods, okay, 28, will draw a line in a way that those 28 will become part of the Palestinian state. And the 200,000 Jews who sit in that many settlements will become part of Israel. I think a very smart solution considering the existing situation on the ground. Well, if you ask me, that's the only solution. You cannot create a solution without dividing between the Jews and the Arabs. Now, the borderline goes like two snakes making love, but you have no other option. You have no other option. It can be a result. If there is a will, it can be a result. Now comes the point of the settlements and the refugees. The refugees, I'm excluding the numbers that the UN is publishing because many of them died already, many of them weren't born yet, and they are all included in these big numbers of 5 million refugees. But let's say it's 2 million refugees. Doesn't make any difference for me if it's 2, 3, or 4. Because Israel cannot take in that many refugees in order to compensate them for what they call the Nakba, which means the time when Israel conquered the parts of Palestine and they were driven away. Driven or ran away, that for me it's the same outcome. Well, with the refugees we know that we cannot take them in, but between Olmert as Prime Minister and Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, as the president of the authority, were thrown two numbers. Abu Mazen said, over 10 years, take in 100,000 people over 10 years. And Olmert says 20,000 people over 5 years. Okay? None of the numbers will change the balance. None of them. Psychologically, it has an impact on the population of the state of Israel, taking in 100,000 Arabs and refugees. And we didn't treat fairly Arabs who ran away from their villages instead of fighting us in the upper north, and we didn't bring them back to their villages until today. And think in terms of taking in 100,000 people and try to disperse them in a way that will be as close to their original home as it was. So between those two numbers, 20 and 100, there are that many numbers that you can continue to talk. You can continue to talk forever, but you have to conclude. It's a token number. Has agreed upon everybody else. Even the Saudi plan, that we didn't consider it at any time, which is quite a good plan, by the way, said that refugees have the right to return to their places according to UN conclusion number 1, by agreement. Once they said by agreement, you have a veto. So it has to be a concluded number between them and us. It can be done. You'll find people in Israel in the political arena that will say not even one. Okay? But those who say not even one are saying the same thing for everything. Which reminds me, second term of a moment. There was one president that on his second term in the party convention in San Francisco said that the Democrats went so far left that they left America. So those were so much right that you can write them off. Because you cannot go to the extreme, not even one. So you have to talk in terms that reach a conclusion. That's as far as the refugees are concerned. Settlers, I told you, about 25, let's say 30,000 households have to be removed. But I want you to know that of those households, 75% are working in Israel, are not working on the West Bank. There are no jobs on the West Bank, only for those who are teachers, managing the townships, and being the fire brigade over there. Other than that, there are no jobs on the West Bank, so they come to work. And if you drive in the morning from the West Bank towards Herzliya, Tel Aviv, bumper to bumper for 3 hours. So it's not a matter of how to find a way to make a living in their new location. It's a way of how do they and us analyze, because there are kids over there, they were born already over there. Their home is no other than the place that they were born. So it's not that simple. It's very complicated, but it can be handled. It can be handled. It takes leadership. By the way, for everything we have talked today, it takes leadership. Without leadership, nothing will happen. It's not the public opinion and the polls that were presented by this organization or another. No, it's the leader who is at the top of the pyramid, who basically breaks the ice. Now comes Jerusalem. Now, I'm not talking about Clinton, I'm talking about the Holy Basin. In the Holy Basin, it took an engineer from heaven to create such a composition over there. It's kind of integrated one into the other. And it's very difficult to solve it. So it cannot be basically the territory of Israel, nor the territory of the Palestinians. What Ehud Olmert suggested when he negotiated with the Palestinians, being prime minister at the time, was let's establish a municipality that will take care of the people who live in the Holy Basin. And in the area of the old city that has over 100 holy places for the three religions. Let's have a municipality that will be composed of United States, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Palestine, and Israel. And those five will be responsible for the life of that many people who live there, provide them with all the solutions for their sewage and education, and providing them with food, whatever they need, communication, will give them all the services. And those five, that Saudi Arabia and the King of Jordan are responsible by the Arab League for the holy places, etc., etc., etc. Abu Mazen didn't want it. And you have to be fair with Ehud Olmert, no prime minister in Israel will divide Jerusalem. I mean the smaller Jerusalem, the Holy Basin, will not divide it. So it has to be a solution that will keep it as one part. Abu Mazen said, no, you'll get the Jewish quarter, you'll get the Wailing Wall, you'll get half of the Armenian quarter, because that's the way you go to the Wailing Wall, and the rest will be ours. Didn't work. Olmert didn't accept it, and he didn't accept Olmert's solution, and it is stuck. Again, I'll say there is a will, there is a way, and they can resolve this issue. And I think that what we have suggested is a municipality of 5 countries, 3 of them are Arab countries. Okay. That doesn't mean that our today's government is willing to accept it. So that's where we are. And it's a shame, because this piece of land can be a paradise if we'll succeed to divide the properties between the Jews and the Arabs in a way that nobody will be fully satisfied, but will be satisfied to the point where he will see an option to continue to live here. So if you ask me, is there a chance? Well, living here, my children are here, my grandchildren are here, I said yes. Am I right? I don't know. I really don't know. But I'm trying to do whatever I can in order to convince people that it can be solved. I would assume that somebody has a question. Because I'm good, but not that good that you understood everything.
Are there an increasing number of voices like yours that give hope for the future?
No. It's much easier to advocate an extreme right-wing approach than a moderate approach. Anywhere in the world, by the way. Because when you talk to moderate people, they start to explain this and that and the other thing, and it's too long. Nobody has the patience to listen. When you are on the extreme on the right, they say, yes, or no, or we don't want, or they are terrible, and that's it. And it's easy to accept. It's understood by the masses. And unfortunately, my government keeps its position by teaching people to hate. And the hate towards Arabs, including Israeli Arabs, has reached a point where some people don't even understand not how to say democracy, how to write democracy. So the right is getting stronger. And there are 2 ways. Either a heavenly light, which will come from above and open the eyes of the people. Well, in ancient history, it did happen. Mm-hmm. In our history, very seldom that it happens. Or, God forbid, a catastrophe. Because when there is a catastrophe, people are more open to think, what could have been if? What could have been if is a very complicated grammar sentence in English, let alone in Hebrew. Okay? Yes, sir.
I just want to make sure I understand, and then I have a quick question. So you're saying the solution that you're suggesting here is a 2-state solution that would include limited immigration of those refugees coming in, so that it would create a homogeneous population for Israel.
Yes.
Palestine would have their own. So my question is, the United States tried that in the 20s with President Coolidge. and it created a very racist deal with this limited immigration, with excluding Chinese and others. Do you think that that's the route that you really want to go for Israel?
I'm not sure I got your last sentence.
Yes, sir. So basically, for the United States, it created a very racist deal because we were saying we're only going to accept certain people from certain areas, and we limited immigration from everywhere else. Now, I'm not suggesting the United States has a perfect immigration deal now, but that system was changed from 1924. Is that the best solution for Israel now? Because for us in the United States, it created a very racist system.
So let me tell you, you cannot compare the social situation in the United States from the very beginning until today to what took place here. Mm-hmm. Here we are talking about two people. When you talk racism, you talk about one people, divided by color of skin or by religion or whatever. But we talk about two nations, a separate religion, a separate culture, a separate language. Hebrew and Arabic are Semitic languages. There are very many words which are identical, but it's still a different language, and this is a different language. So, nothing to compare. It has nothing to do with racism. Believe me, we have enough racism inside between Jews. Okay? We don't have to look for other issues of friction. And you know, we tell about ourselves that on a single remote island was one Jewish family. The guy was pretty rich, and he built two synagogues. One for him to go, and the other one not to step a foot over there. So you can see where the racism exists inside your heart concerning Jews, one against the other. You can see the ultra-religious against the secular. You can see the Sephardic Jews against the European Jews. I mean, because the government enjoys the balance of hate. With that, he can really promote why I should become, because I will defend you, and I will, and I will, and I will. But don't compare the two situations. It has nothing to do with racism. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, you talked about once it's decided the number of refugees that could return.
A token number.
Right. How would that then be decided? Who gets to be that number?
Not our business.
Who would decide?
Let the Palestinians decide. Like, there is a big conflict between the Hamas in Gaza and the Fatah on the West Bank, okay? We should intervene. The Arabs should conclude this issue amongst themselves and solve it. Can it be done? Maybe. Really maybe, because, yeah, there were more hands raised. I'll go around like this. Yes, sir.
So, on one of your Iran options, you mentioned was the bombing of their nuclear facilities, or so-called nuclear facilities. But intelligence says most of it has been moved underground to where you couldn't reach it through bunker-busting bombs. So, if there was Air Force sent to take that out, would that create more hostility with Hamas and the Arabs in the country, and create more of a problem for almost suicide for Israel?
You don't have to increase. It's there already, okay? Up to the rim. So it's not a question of do we increase or don't we? Look, I'll make it very simplistic. If Israel attacks Iran with its air force in order to cause damage to the nuclear installations, it means a declaration of war against Iran. As simple as that. And the last thing we need is a declared war initiated by us against Iran. Secondly, a responsible prime minister should think of the day after. What's going to happen the day after? I can draw a scenario that will paralyze Israel. I'm telling you that one missile over Haifa harbor, no insurance company will insure any ship to go into Israel. Another bomb on Ben Gurion Airport, no airline will land in Israel. So you have to think in terms of what's going to be the next step. Because when you start a war, it's like going into a hospital. You know how you get in. You never know how you get out. Yes.
Two quick questions. One, how representative would you say your views are of Israeli security experts and the Israeli general public? And two, you mentioned earlier that you're doing everything that you can to convince people that peace is indeed possible. Maybe not easy. Why do you want to convince us as Americans?
No, I don't want to convince you. You want me to convince you.
Yeah.
Because you asked me to come here and talk to
Hey, I love how you speak so direct. I love how you speak so directly, and I love your vision about not focusing so much on the past, but on the present and the future. So we've experienced some situations that look like kind of human prisons, like Gaza. We weren't there, but just because of the borders, because of that, some parts of Bethlehem and others. In your mind, as you're trying to educate the youth and trying to help everyone say there are some pathways to peace if the will is there, it seems like the will is kind of flaring up at points where the youth are showing resistance, where potentially violence will continue. How long do you think Israel has to change some things before there is kind of escalated violence and some more damage done?
First of all, we don't have too much time. And we are living now on borrowed time. I think what we should have done with Gaza is open up the blockade. Just open up the blockade. And do whatever you can in order for Gaza to rebuild itself and to create a life where people would like to live there. There are more than 75% of unemployment in Gaza today. I mean, this is terrible. And we shouldn't keep it this way. The question is Gaza a homogeneous community? But it's not. And Hamas is fighting to keep its regime because the extreme jihadists are fighting Hamas. And they are inspired by ISIS. It's not that ISIS is telling them what to do as much as they are inspired by what ISIS does. The sooner we'll open up the blockade, the sooner there is a chance for those jihadists to crumble. But for that, you have to prepare the people of Israel. I mean, look, a government cannot say, well, tomorrow we are going to... No, it doesn't work this way. You have to preach to people as to what to do and why. And if you do that for quite a lengthy time, then it works. Then it works. Remember how long did it take for President Roosevelt to declare a war? It took the Japanese to attack Pearl Harbor in order for him to say it's a war. Everybody else resented it. They didn't want to go into World War II. So you have to prepare the people. You have to talk to the people. You have to explain them. That's what leadership is. It's not that you wake up in the morning and you say, from tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock we open up. Well, what do you mean we open up? Until yesterday you told us we shouldn't. So it's a whole process that has to take place. Yes, ma'am.
Last night some of us heard from a person who helps with the refugees from Sudan and Eritrea. He was saying something like 45,000 are in a it's an open, it was a prison, now it's an open facility. Are you familiar with what's going on there? What do you think is a way to solve that issue?
I'll tell you. First of all, we have to abide international law. And if those people are really refugees who asked to save their life as a result of a danger to their life in their home country, we have to be open for them. By the way, we wanted the world community in 1941 to be open for the Jewish European community in order to take them in instead of going into Poland and ending as they did. So we have to be open as well. The question comes up, how far? How many? What do we do when they come in? If we would have liked to take them in, believe me, some of them or many of them can work as well as other workers that we are importing from the Far East, just as an example. But we hope to show that we mean business, that we want to do it, and to give them a permit. We give them unreasonable conditions, if you ask me. And that's, again, because people are pushing to the extreme. And as a result of them being concentrated mainly in one neighborhood in Tel Aviv, it created an unbearable situation for the neighborhood, which was not so strong to begin with. To manage a country is as difficult as to manage a business. But if you go broke with a business, so a business went down the drain, and you get broke with a country.
Sir, thank you so much for your time and wisdom. It is truly, truly appreciated. My friend Jan here asked a question under her breath that makes a lot of sense to me, and I have a few follow-up questions. One, can you run for president? Can you run for president? Prime Minister?
I'll tell you. First of all, as far as basic qualifications, here, some is being asked for more than the US for a president. In the United States, you have to be born and above the age of 21. And those are the two qualifications. But bear in mind, I'm too old.
So then,
I'm 81 years old, and that's it.
So you had mentioned that you're training the younger generation into leaders. How long until someone who desires peace rises to the mantle? And then a follow-up question after that is, you're totally right. You've convinced me.
Look,
what's the next step?
Normally, young people, if they weren't raised at home with this kind of an approach, are attending, especially in a country that has a mandatory military service. And who's the enemy? So when you take a youngster at the age of 18 and you teach him who is the enemy, in order to make him understand that peace is the solution and not war, he has to be transformed from what is being explained to him and adopted by himself very easily. And then you ask him to go through a process that will take a long time until he really gets it in his blood that this is a solution. So it's a long time. But in a country, a long time doesn't frighten you. Okay? Unless you're on the verge, on a slope. And guys, thank you very much.
Thank you.